God made you. Is that true? God made you. And there are many implications of that fact. If you believe it, things will be very different in your mind, in your thinking, in your emotions, in your life, than if you don't really believe it. We talked earlier, if you were here before church, Taya did a little thing on the human body and how amazing it is. I'm going to play a clip, and this is a clip from a series of videos. So it's actually from, do I have control here? There we go. It's actually a little clip that I made. It's very short. It's from this series by Michael Behe. Does anybody know who Michael Behe is? He is a professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He also has written some famous books. He wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. Anybody heard of that book? He also has written a book called Darwin Devolves. And basically, yeah, I won't go into his whole story, but the clip that I'm about to show you, this series is great. I highly recommend watching it. It's a very short clip, but what you're going to see is just some animations of things that we now know are happening inside the cells of your body at a microscopic level. And the point of watching these clips, it's short, the point of watching them is just to go, what? Like, how can that be? And then he's also going to show a bacteria, and it won't give you the context in the clip, so I'm going to give you the context. He's going to show a bacteria that actually produces magnetic iron crystals and lines them up inside itself so that it can orient itself in which direction to swim, up or down. Okay? So he's going to show that real quick and show basically how that compares to like a modern industrial factory, pretty much. Okay, so let's watch this clip for a minute.
What was a mystery to Charles Darwin is now well understood. We know that the cell encodes and transmits information that regulates the size and shape of living things. And we know the cell is comprised of insanely complex machinery. What's more, much of it is irreducibly complex. All the parts are necessary in order for an irreducibly complex system to work. When you peer inside a bacterium, it's hard to make out the complex micromachines and systems that make it function. So, for the moment, let's portray the components inside this bacterium in a way that all of us can relate to. This is the magnetotactic bacterium crystal factory. It has a digital command center, quality control, reactors, transporters, and more. This is a magnetosome. Its protective membrane encloses the iron. When we peek inside, we can see that the amazing magnetosome is a nanoreactor. The iron particles are grown and fashioned into these astonishing magnetite crystals. Finally, these forklift guys transport the magnetosomes. They're carefully placed along a special filament that provides a guideline to achieve optimal magnetic alignment. So it's a very impressive factory. But it's all made possible by what is the key component for every modern factory: the command center. The bacterium's DNA. All instructions for the entire operation originate here. And what is truly remarkable is that the final dimensions are all within specific tolerances. Oversized, undersized, or misshapen crystals would impair magnetism. But thanks to their precise shape and alignment, the bacteria successfully navigate to healthy depths.
What? This is just a tiny clip. I mean, I highly encourage this series that we're about to go into is not about all of this. We're not going to be talking about most of this today. I'm just going to use that to make one point in a second. I highly encourage you to look into what do we now know about what's going on inside of a cell. There are many different areas where we've learned enough that you don't need to be, I mean, there are people who need to be very well trained in these things. But you don't need to be very well trained to look at those systems those animations of what's going on at the microscopic level inside of every one of your cells right now and go, what? Somebody made this. Isn't it kind of obvious that somebody made it? Here's the thing. We're about to go into a series called Resurrection. We're going to be talking about this idea that God can bring the dead back to life, literally and figuratively. Now, that idea seems crazy to some people. But if God made you, why couldn't he remake you? If it's really true that God made you, then it really shouldn't be that big of a deal for him to make you all over again one day. All right, we're going into this series, Resurrection. This is going to be a fun series leading up to Easter. And what we'll do in this series is a number of things. Each week we'll have some piece of evidence, just some little thing. That the idea behind this is to bring forth something that makes us go, yeah, well, it's really not unreasonable that God could raise the dead. If there really is a God, okay, now if you're not convinced of that, that's going to be a different series. That's not going to be this series. But if there really is a God, then it's not unreasonable at all to think that he could bring back to life everyone who's ever lived, that he could raise the dead. One of the things that we're going to structure this series around a particular story in the Bible, and we'll go through it today in just a minute. We'll go through it a little bit each week. But there's a story in the Bible where Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, especially the letters, he asks this question: why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead? And I think that's a fantastic question for all of us to ask ourselves, and that's what we're going to ask ourselves during this series. And it's a fantastic question to pose to the culture around us. Because many people, what does the word incredible mean? What does it literally mean? Not believable. Why should any of you consider it not possible to believe, unbelievable, that God raises the dead? And I know for me, before I was a Christian, and for many people today, one of the big objections to faith isn't so much a thought or an intellectual objection, it's just a feeling. It's just a feeling that, like, miracles, that can't be real, right? God raising Jesus from the dead, that can't be real, right? People just feel like that's kind of impossible. That's not really built on anything. It's not built on any logical thought or looking at the evidence. It's just something we feel because the culture around us for several hundred years has had that as a key component, that miracles just can't happen. That God just can't, dead people just don't come back to life. That's not a thing. Why? Why is it unbelievable? It's not. That's what we're going to go through in this series. So we're going to bring one little piece of evidence. We're also going to bring this story, which I'll go through in some detail in just a minute. We'll bring it back, the story of Paul asking this question and who he asked it to. And then we're going to bring this point across quite clearly, which God brings across through the entire Bible to us. The thing about God is, and I brought this up for a few weeks already, the thing about God is, one of the very important things you need to know about him and about his character is that he brings the dead back to life. That's part of who he is. And that's part of how he operates. We saw that earlier in the offering verses, right? Jesus talking about this is a general principle in how God has built the world. He brings the dead back to life. That's what he does. And so in this series, we'll also be looking at the idea of resurrection throughout the entire Bible. So today, we're going to start in the books of Moses. Okay, we're going to go through this story from Paul, and then we're going to look at just the idea of resurrection and what God was teaching about who he is and how he brings the dead back to life in the books of Moses. So that's the first 5 books of the Bible. And we're going to throw Job in there too, because Job is probably super old. It's hard to know. Then next week, Tyler will be preaching next week. That's going to be exciting. Let's hear some encouragement. He's going to look at the idea of resurrection and how that comes across in the Psalms. So in the worship songs of ancient Israel, How did God teach them that he is a God who brings the dead back to life? Then we'll be looking at the prophets later, and then Jesus' resurrection itself. That'll be actually the week before Easter. And then on Easter Sunday itself, we'll be looking at the idea of resurrection in the future. So what does the Bible predict will happen in the future? Not just predict, tell us will happen in the future about the dead coming back to life. So this is going to be really cool. Okay, this is going to be really fun. Today, let's start off. 2 pieces. Paul before Agrippa, the story of Paul where he asks this question, which I think is a fantastic question, and then we'll run through some verses in the first 5 books of the Bible on resurrection. All right, so here we go. Let me read this story for you, and then we'll talk about it. Maybe a little bit of context here. I'm feeling very interactive today. Bible nerds, Bible scholars, where is Paul when he's standing before Agrippa in Acts chapter 26? Sorry, if you're online, you can write something in, but it won't come until we won't see it till 30 seconds after you write it. Where is Paul? Caesarea. Yeah, so this is in Israel, right? And this is on the coast versus Jerusalem, which is further east. And where was he? Anybody know how long he's been in Caesarea? Why is he in Caesarea? What's going on? Is he on vacation? Is he hanging out at the beach, suntanning? Yeah, and he's been in jail at this point. Anybody know how long he's been in jail? You'd have to be a real Bible nerd to know that. Yeah, he's been in jail for 2 years at this point. What's he in jail for? That's what part of this story is going to be about. He's going to argue what he's actually in jail for. The Jewish people, his own nation, which we've been talking about, wanted to kill him. They couldn't manage to kill him, so they got him arrested. And then he appealed to Caesar, right, the emperor. And so he's kind of been trapped. He's kind of been stuck in prison for 2 years while they wait to transport him back to Rome to go on trial for his life. Okay? Excellent. So that's the context. So he's on trial before Agrippa, who is a king. Can anybody remember the couple of different kings or rulers who are associated, who are present here? There's Agrippa. Agrippa is one of the Herods. Very good. So Herod Agrippa is his name. Actually, so Herod is kind of like his Jewish name, even though he's only part Jewish. And Agrippa is the Roman part of his name. He named himself after a famous Roman so that he could, get in good with the overlords, right? Okay, anyway, there was Felix, was the Roman governor and then Festus, right? Porcius Festus is currently the Roman governor. So it's actually Festus and Agrippa are present at this meeting, and Paul is on trial for his life. Okay, that's enough background here. Let's see what Paul says here. Paul's speaking to Agrippa. Well, maybe one more thing. He is on trial. So what Agrippa expects, what do you think Agrippa expects him to do? Beg for his life. This was the normal mode of conduct. So you're on trial for your life. The thing that you do is go to the king or the ruler or whatever and just beg him. Like you bring your kids out if you got kids. I've got these babies. You bring your wife. She's going to cry. Paul doesn't have either of those at this point. But you bring whatever sympathy you can get, and you get on your knees and you cry and you beg. Okay? Paul gives this speech, and he tries to convert Agrippa to become a Christian. That's what he does. Okay. Agrippa said to Paul, "You have permission to speak for yourself." So Paul motioned with his hand and began his defense. King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews. And especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. The Jewish people all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They have known me for a long time, and they can testify, if they were willing, they're probably not, but they can testify that I conformed to the strictest sect of our religion, living as a Pharisee. That means he wore special clothes, he had all kinds of spiritual practices, he fasted twice a week. And now it's because of my hope in what our God has promised our ancestors that I'm on trial today. It's not because I did something bad, it's because I actually believe that God could do this. This is the promise our 12 tribes are hoping to see fulfilled as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it's because of this hope that the Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible or unbelievable that God raises the dead? The hope that he's saying that the Jews are against him and they've got him arrested. He's on trial for his life because of his hope that the dead will actually be raised. Because of his belief that God already has raised one person from the dead. Who is that person? Jesus himself. Paul believes it. The Jews who are against him do not. Here's an image, a picture of this for us here. Here's Agrippa. Here's Festus. Here's Paul himself making this defense. We'll go through the rest of the story in future weeks as we go through this series. There's all kinds of amazing stuff that happens in here. I mean, what happens very soon as Paul preaches about this, Festus can't control himself after a little while, and Festus blurts out. Does anybody know what Festus blurts out? You've lost your mind, Paul. You are literally insane to believe this. This is an image of our world right now. There are Christians in the world who believe as an actual. So this is what we believe at Community of Hope Church. We actually believe that Jesus was a human being and he died really dead, physically dead, and God brought him back to life physically. This is what we believe. And lots of people, well, first of all, lots of people in the church or even hanging around church probably kind of feel like, wow, is that even really possible? And how does our culture feel about it? They feel like Festus, right? They feel like Festus standing up, almost not able to contain themselves after a little while. It's just like, you have lost your mind if you believe that that's true. When people die, they're just dead. That's all there is to it. People don't come back. There's not going to be some resurrection from the dead at the end of time. That's insanity. And how does Paul respond when Festus blurts that out? He responds very calmly. He says, Festus, honorable Roman governor, I am not insane. I have not lost my mind. There is real evidence. There's real evidence and reason to believe that God has raised the dead and that he will raise the dead. This is a powerful moment, so much like our culture. And so where are you sitting? So there's Festus, he's like the culture, and there's Paul, he is utterly confident that God has raised the dead already. He's seen the resurrected Jesus with his own eyes. It blinded him, and his eyes were sick and unhealthy for the rest of his life. And then there's Agrippa. What's the deal with Agrippa? I mean, first of all, he's got all kinds of things. So Agrippa is a Jewish king, right? But only kind of. So his great-grandfather, can anybody guess? So this is Herod Agrippa. Anybody guess who his great-grandpa was? His great-grandpa was a guy named Herod the Great, who was so great that he murdered every infant and toddler in a certain town called Bethlehem who was 2 years old or younger because he was trying to kill baby Jesus. So this is his great-grandson, Herod Agrippa. Herod Agrippa's dad, who was also called Herod Agrippa, very easy to sort them out in the Bible. Herod Agrippa's dad was an enemy of the Christians in the earliest days in Jerusalem. So Herod Agrippa's dad was actually the last Herod who ruled over Judea itself and Jerusalem. And his dad had this showdown with, guys like Peter. Herod's dad was the guy who had Peter arrested, and then Peter was miraculously released from jail. Where did he go? Herod's dad was the guy who executed James, the brother of John. Chopped his head off because he believed in Jesus. So he is the son of a guy who's had this massive, and then in response, Herod's dad, actually, do you guys know the story in Acts chapter 12? Herod's dad, who's the same name, Herod Agrippa, he was sitting on his throne in Jerusalem. You can find this in Acts chapter 12. And the Christians had been praying that God would either change this guy's heart or remove him. And Herod was sitting on his throne in Jerusalem, and the crowd started to worship him. And the crowd started to chant, "He's not just a man, he's a god." And Herod did not rebuke the crowds. He received worship from the crowds. And then he died in front of the crowds that day. He just, I don't know what, had a heart attack and just dropped over dead. What do you think everybody in Jerusalem thought after that happened? The Christians had been praying consistently that this guy would be changed or removed. And then he receives worship. Oh yeah, I'm great. Maybe I am a god. And then he drops dead in front of a crowd of thousands of people. They thought that God had killed him because of the Christians' prayers. That's what they thought. And this is his son. Yet, Paul tells us in this story, he's really excited to be able to speak to Agrippa because Agrippa actually knows the Bible. And he believes parts of the Bible. So Agrippa is much like, okay, God probably didn't strike your dad or your dad dead or something, but he's much like many of us in church, actually. He's torn. He's torn. Do I really believe this? Like, really, really? I kind of do. He's in the middle. So we have Paul, who firmly believes. We have Festus, who's like the world and the culture, and we have Agrippa, who's right in the middle. And Paul is giving him this speech. And this is what we're going to try to do in this series of messages. We're going to try and do what Paul did for Agrippa. We're going to try and do for ourselves and for our culture, for our church and our people today. Wow. It's a powerful story. All right, let's go through the beginning. Let's just look through some of the ideas of resurrection in the first 5 books of the Bible. And we're not going deep into any of these things, so if you are new to this and you don't know some of these stories, there's going to be some stuff that you don't fully understand. That's okay, because we can't go into the details of every story. First point is this: humans were made to live forever. So our culture, the idea, the feeling today is that, oh, death is just sort of, yeah, of course, everyone always dies. That's because that's our universal experience, but that's not what human beings were made for originally. Check this out from Genesis chapter 3. This is, of course, God is speaking after human beings have rebelled against him, Adam and Eve. The Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and live forever." So what does this tell us about the original plan and the state of human beings at the beginning? God had provided a way that human beings would never die. We were not intended, and we are not ultimately intended to die. We are intended to live forever. This is what the first 5 books of the Bible are telling us, in this case, the first book. Oh, I guess there was this. He drives them out of the garden. This is where death comes in, right? He drives them out of the garden. He declares that now that they've rebelled against God, our ancestors, that death will be present in the world and in our lives. And he drives them away. There's this image at the end, right? He drives them out of the Garden of Eden, and he sets these angels, cherubim, with a flaming sword flashing back and forth. For what purpose? To guard the way to the tree of life. We can't get to the source that would have made us live forever now. It's separated. This is an image for it, right? This is from the Sistine Chapel, and this is the famous image of God giving life to Adam. That life was not intended to be just 75 or 80 years. It was intended to be forever, and it one day will be. This is the plan of God. Next, moving forward in the book of Genesis, once the whole world has rebelled against God and everything's gotten worse and worse, and there's a flood, and then God brings people back through Noah's line, and then things get really bad all over again, right? And then God's big plan to start to save the world is that he calls a dysfunctional family, right? So much of the first book of Genesis is about the family of who? Abraham, right? Abraham and his family. And his family is super dysfunctional. Sometimes we'll do a series where we just go through Abraham's family because it's powerful, right? because we see that the people that God called to do these massive things in the history of the world are just as bad, just as messed up as every single one of us and our dysfunctional families. Just as messed up. Maybe more in some ways. Sometimes I think maybe he called the most dysfunctional families so that none of us would feel like we can't be used by him. So the call of Abram, right? So he's Abram and then he's Abraham, same guy. So go from your country, your people, your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Here's an image of Abraham maybe receiving the call. And there's so many things in this story. What does this have to do with resurrection, coming back to life? I mean, our first point, humans were made to live forever, so it makes sense that God would bring us back to life someday. What does the call of Abraham have to do with us, with resurrection and coming back to life? Think how many ways God was bringing life from the dead in this story. Abram's own father, actually, I am convinced, Terah, had been called by God. And he began to follow the call, and then his son died, Abraham's brother, Haran, died, and he abandoned following God. He wouldn't follow anymore. And yet God keeps bringing the call back. In those early chapters of Genesis, God tries over and over again to get people to follow him, and finally Abraham is the one who finally does. He keeps on bringing the call back when it seems like it's dead. The whole world has been separated from God. There's no way back to the tree of life, but God is going to make a way, and he's going to use a dysfunctional family. Right? Think about some of the other things that we know about Abraham and his family, right? He promised Abraham, we just saw, that his descendants he'd have all these descendants. And then what happens next? He has a ton of kids. What happens next is he lives until he's 100 years old, and he hasn't even had one kid. What did it seem like to Abraham? It seemed like the promise was broken. It seemed like the dream, the call was dead. I mean, we read these things in the Bible, and to us it looks like they all happened at once. This happened he lived to be 100 years old. How long was he following God before any of the promise came to pass? The word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abraham. I'm your shield, your very great reward. Abraham says, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. Abram said, You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars. This is after he's super old. We don't know exactly how old at this point, but nearly 100 years old at this point. You got to believe that I am still going to give you a son. And you got to still believe this thing that I told you like 50 years ago. You got to still believe it, Abraham. If you can count the stars, look at them. If you can count the stars, then you'll be able to count the number of children that I'm going to give you, your offspring. And Abraham believed the Lord, even though it made no sense. It looked like the promise was dead. Do you see it? And God brought the promise back to life. And Abraham had faith to believe that God could bring that call back to life, even though he was as good as dead. We're going to skip through some of this. There's a story of his wife, Sarah. I mean, same thing. When she has Isaac, she's 90. Think about that for a minute, ladies. She's 90. I don't know if I have a picture here. I don't think I do. No, we're going to skip all these verses for sake of time. She's 90, and so when she's told for the first time, Abraham comes, I mean, imagine your husband comes to you. You're 90. He comes to you and says, I still think God's going to give us a child. He told me. And then there's angels. There's a story of some angels are sent to meet with Abraham. They just look like regular people, But they tell Abraham right before the child's going to be born, within the next year, this child is going to be born. And Sarah overhears it, and what does she do? She laughs hysterically. And then there's this really funny scene. I won't read it for us here, but there's a really funny scene where the visitors, who turn out to be angels, are like, Sarah, why did you laugh? Like that couldn't be. Don't you know God made you like he can do anything? And Sarah says, I didn't laugh. And the angel said, yes, you did. And Sarah says, no, I didn't. And the angels say, yes, you did. Like they go back and forth. It's like a comedy routine. It's ridiculous. This is an ancient document. It's crazy. And then even after the child is born, so you got this almost 100-year-old couple with a baby. That's hysterical. The promise, God brings things back to life. Then God tells Abraham he's got to give up this child. When the child's like, well, I don't know, how old is Isaac? 12 years old, when Abraham is asked to sacrifice him to the Lord. Even after all that waiting and after all that bringing the promise back to life when it was dead, now God says, okay, now you got to actually sacrifice him. Does this make any sense to Abraham? No sense at all. God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. There are tons of reasons God did this. We're not going to get into them today. Partly to prefigure what would happen with his son, Jesus. But Abraham knew none of this. It looked like, once again, the promise is dead. You're going to take away this one thing that you gave me. So this is a famous painting. This is a Rembrandt painting of the angel. Of course, Abraham does not sacrifice his own son because God stops him at the last moment once it's clear that Abraham is going to do it. He trusts God that much. And what are we told in the book of Hebrews? By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He didn't actually sacrifice him, but he went to do it. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. It made no sense. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned. What was going on in Abraham's mind? How did he have faith to do this? Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. What is God trying to get across to this family? So he pulls this family out. What is he trying to get across to us through this whole Old Testament? Over and over and over again, he's the God who brings dead stuff back to life. When everything is entirely hopeless, he's the God who does stuff right there. That's who he is. He's trying to show them what kind of God he is over and over and over again. Oh, I don't have time to go through all of these things. Think about Moses in front of the burning bush. We're going to have to skip through all. Let's just jump to the picture here. Wait, where's my picture of Moses in the burning bush? There it is. Moses in front of the burning bush, right? We don't have time to tell the story, but how old was Moses when this happened? He was 80 years old. Most people are retiring way before they're 80, right? Moses hadn't even begun his ministry when he was 80. The thing that he thought God had called his whole life to do and to be, he thought it had entirely failed. The dream was dead. He had no connection to God. God shows up in his life and brings the whole thing back to life when he's 80. And basically this, on and on and on through the whole Old Testament. I mean, we've talked about some of the first 5 books here, but it happens again and again and again. Think about what else happens with Moses. He goes to the people of Israel, and what happens? He takes them out of Egypt, and then they're stuck in front of the Red Sea, and all the people of Israel think, we're dead. And then God brings them back to life through the Red Sea. He brings them out and into a new life out of slavery. They were dead to God, and God dead to them when they were in slavery. They didn't even know about this God of their ancestors, and he brings it back. He brings the whole dream back. Over and over again in the Old Testament, the people of Israel do what? Turn away from God, live like God doesn't exist, and then everything collapses, and it seems hopeless. They are utterly destroyed. The dream is dead, and then God brings it back to life. This happens, I don't even know how many times this happens in the Old Testament. Probably like 100 times it happens in the Old Testament. We'll wrap up our survey of the oldest books with this idea, just this idea of Job. This is a famous painting of Job on the dunghill, right? Everything, Job is this guy. He might even be way before the book of Genesis. We're not even sure when Job lived, super long time ago. But he has great life. He's following God. He's serving God in every way. And of course, the story is God allows Satan to just wreck everything in Job's life. Everything except for the fact of actually killing Job outright. Like all his kids die. His wife tells him to curse God and die. Your wife tells you to curse God and die. Wow. What a moment. He breaks out in boils. He gets super sick. He goes and he rips off all his clothes and goes and throws himself on a compost heap. And just cries for months. I don't know. And in the middle of that, I want to read this verse for you. In the middle of that, Job has a moment that's really prophetic. And we'll wrap up the message with this moment from Job. In the middle of his utter devastation and destruction, when everything seems completely hopeless, Job says this, "After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me." Job understood something in his hopelessness that God has been trying to get across to us throughout all of history, and he's trying to get it across to us today. He is a God who brings the dead back to life in every way. Figuratively, when you are hopeless, he is the God who brings the dead back to life. Literally, when your physical body dies, he is the God who will bring our physical bodies back to life. It's not crazy. It's really not crazy, though it feels like it sometimes. If he could make us, he can remake us. We'll continue next week. Let's pray.